Yesterday morning, my son Kevin called me, his voice cracking with panic. "Mom, why are all the cards being declined? Jessica's mother and I couldn't pay for lunch at the restaurant. People are laughing at us." His desperation filled me with a satisfaction I never thought I could feel towards my own son. But to understand why I reached this point, I have to tell you what happened the afternoon before, when my daughter-in-law Jessica decided to humiliate me in front of the entire family. I am 68 years old, and for the last 10 years, ever since I was widowed, I have become the personal ATM for my son and his wife. Every whim, every craving, every unnecessary expense came out of my savings. But yesterday, while I was brewing coffee in my own house, Jessica turned to her friends who had come to visit and uttered the words that would change everything forever. "That old woman is only good for paying our bills." My son Kevin, instead of defending me, started laughing as if he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. I just stood there, coffee pot in hand, watching them make fun of me in my own living room. My hands trembled, but not from sadness. They trembled with a cold rage I had never felt before, because in that moment, I understood something I had been denying for years. To them, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a mother-in-law. I wasn't even a person. I was just a bank account with legs. For 10 years, I was their financial salvation. When Kevin lost his job, I paid his rent for 8 months. $800 a month that came out of my retirement fund without him lifting a finger to look for a real job. When Jessica wanted to replace her entire wardrobe because she needed to look professional, it was $3,000 on my credit card. When they wanted to go on vacation to Cancun because they deserved it after so much stress, another $5,000 disappeared from my savings. I was never invited on those vacations, of course. I was good for paying, not for accompanying them. "It's a romantic trip, Mom," Kevin would tell me whenever I hinted that I'd like to see the beach. "You understand, right?" And I, like the idiot I was for years, always understood. I always paid. I always stayed quiet while they lived the life that I financed. The final straw came 3 months ago, when Jessica decided she needed a new car. "The one we have is getting so old, Eleanor," she told me in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something expensive. "Besides, if we're going to have children soon, we need something safer. $15,000 for the down payment. $15,000 that represented 2 years of my savings. But I paid it, as always, because it was for the good of the family. But yesterday, after hearing those poisoned words, after watching my own son laugh at me, something changed in my heart forever. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of sadness, but because of a clarity that burned inside me. I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, turned on my computer, and began to make the decisions I should have made years ago. First, I canceled all the authorized user cards they had in my name, every one of the 5 cards they used, as if they were their own. Then, I closed the joint savings account where I deposited money every month for emergencies that were never real emergencies, but rather expensive restaurant bills and designer clothes. I also changed all the passwords to my bank accounts and removed their names from my automatic transfers. At 6 o'clock in the morning, when I was finished, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in my favorite armchair. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I knew that soon my phone would ring, and on the other end would be my son, desperate, humiliated, demanding an explanation, and I would be ready to give him one. The phone rang at exactly 9:15 in the morning. I was sitting in my kitchen, enjoying my second coffee of the day, when I saw Kevin's name on the screen. I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring 3 more times while I savored this moment of power I hadn't felt in decades. When I finally answered, his voice was desperate, almost hysterical. "Mom, why are all the cards being declined? I'm here at the Hawthorne Grill with Jessica's mother. We wanted to have lunch and celebrate her birthday, but none of the cards work. It's humiliating. People are staring at us. The waiter is getting impatient, and I don't have enough cash to cover a $200 check. What is going on?" The irony was delicious. They had chosen the Hawthorne Grill, the most expensive restaurant in town, to impress Jessica's mother. The same place I was never invited to, despite having paid for their family dinners there for years when they went without me. Now they were there, surrounded by the high society they so desperately wanted to impress, and they couldn't even pay for a single plate. "Good morning, Kevin?" I replied with a calm that surprised even me. The cards are canceled because I've decided I'm no longer going to finance your lifestyle. What? Are you crazy? We're in public. Jessica's mother is here. How am I supposed to explain that my own mother left me high and dry? This is ridiculous. What's ridiculous, son, was hearing you laugh yesterday when your wife said I was only good for paying her bills. What's ridiculous was realizing that for 10 years I've been treated like an ATM instead of your mother. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear voices in the background, probably Jessica and her mother wondering what was happening. The waiter must have been waiting for the payment, and other diners were starting to notice the uncomfortable situation. Mom, please don't do this now. We can talk later, but I need you to reactivate the cards. Just for today. I promise that. No, I interrupted him. There are no more promises, Kevin. No more just for today. For 10 years I've heard the same promises. For 10 years I've been your easy solution for everything. But yesterday I learned something important. You don't respect me, you don't value me, and you definitely don't love me the way I loved you. That's not true. Of course we love you. Jessica was just joking. You know how she is. I know exactly how she is, Kevin. And I know exactly how you are. That's why I made this decision. I could hear him breathing heavily. I imagined the situation in the restaurant was getting more tense with every passing minute. Jessica's mother had probably noticed something was wrong, that the gold card he always used to impress people wasn't working. Mom, please, we can't just stand here. What do you want us to do? Wash dishes? Call the police? This is a humiliation. Now you know how I've felt for years, I replied. The difference is that you're 35 years old, and you should be able to solve your own problems. Are you sick? Are you feeling okay? This isn't like you, Mom. You've never been this cruel. Cruel. That word hit me like a slap. I was cruel? After years of sacrificing, of depriving myself of things I wanted to give them everything they asked for? After working until I was 65 to ensure they would have a decent inheritance? After being left alone every Christmas while they traveled with my gifts of money? Cruel was you laughing at me yesterday, I said with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. Cruel was treating me like I was invisible for years, except when you needed money. Cruel was making me feel that my only value as a mother and as a person was my bank account. Mom, Jessica didn't mean it like that. Jessica said exactly what she was thinking. And you agreed with her. You both made it very clear what my place is in your lives. I heard louder voices in the background. Jessica asking what was going on, her mother making comments I couldn't quite distinguish, but that sounded annoyed. The waiter had probably brought the check by now, and was waiting with that forced patience they use when they know there's a problem. Look, Mom, I get that you're upset, but this isn't the way to solve it. We can sit down and talk like adults, but right now I need you to help me. Just this one more time, and then we can change things. Just this one more time. I laughed, and my own laughter sounded strange and bitter. Do you know how many times I've heard that phrase? Do you know how many last times I've financed over the past 10 years? But Mom, no, Kevin, not this time. This time you're going to have to find another solution. You have jobs, you have friends, you have in-laws. Figure it out. How are we going to explain to Jessica's mother that my own mother abandoned us in a restaurant? How am I going to face the people who know us? Everyone is going to be talking about this. And there it was, the naked truth. He wasn't worried about fixing our relationship. He wasn't reflecting on how they had treated me. He only cared about his image, his reputation, what people would think. Just like always. That's your problem to solve, son. For years I worried about your image, your comfort, your happiness. Now it's time for me to worry about mine. You can't do this. You're my mother. Exactly. I'm your mother, not your employee. I'm your mother, not your personal bank. I'm your mother, not your financial safety net. And as your mother, I should have taught you years ago how to stand on your own 2 feet. There was another silence, longer this time. I could feel his desperation through the phone. He was probably doing mental calculations, thinking about who he could call, how he could get out of this situation without completely losing face. Mom, please, Jessica is crying. Her mother is asking what kind of family we are. The waiter has already asked us 3 times if everything is all right. Please, have mercy. Mercy. Another word that made me tremble. Where was their mercy when I stayed up at night calculating how to pay their expenses on top of my own? Where was their compassion when I deprived myself of buying new clothes so I could give them money for their whims? Mercy is earned over years, Kevin, and you two lost it yesterday. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear or sadness. They were shaking with adrenaline, with a sense of power I hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time in years, I had put my own needs first. For the first time in years, I had said no. For the next 30 minutes, the phone didn't stop ringing. First, it was Kevin again, then Jessica, then a number I didn't recognize but assumed was Jessica's mother. Every call I rejected gave me more strength, more conviction that I was doing the right thing. I poured myself another coffee and sat on my back patio, enjoying the silence I had missed so much. But the calm didn't last long. At 11 in the morning, I heard the unmistakable sound of Kevin's car pulling into my driveway. That car I had helped pay for, of course. 2 doors slammed shut, and I heard hurried footsteps heading towards my front door. The knocking began immediately, loud and insistent. "Mom, open the door. We need to talk." Kevin's voice sounded different now, more desperate but also more aggressive. "I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway." I didn't move. I remained seated on my back patio, invisible from the front entrance, watching the birds at the feeder I had put up last year. It was funny how the small pleasures in life took on new meaning when you finally had the peace of mind to enjoy them. "Eleanor." Now it was Jessica's voice, sharp and demanding. "We know you're in there. Stop acting like a child and come out and face the music." Face the music. As if I were the one who had done something wrong. As if I were the one who owed an explanation after years of financial and emotional abuse. The irony was so absurd it almost made me laugh. The knocking intensified. I could hear they were using their feet now, not just their fists. My oak front door, the door my late husband had installed with so much love, was being pounded on as if it were the entrance to a seedy bar. "This is ridiculous," Jessica shouted. "You made us look like beggars in front of everyone. Kevin's mother-in-law had to pay for our lunch. A 70-year-old woman had to take money out of her purse because her son-in-law's mother is crazy." Ah, so that's what happened. Jessica's mother had to rescue them. I pictured the scene. Kevin sweating bullets as he tried to explain why none of his cards were working, Jessica making up pathetic excuses, and finally the older woman having to save the day. The humiliation must have been exquisite. "Mom, please?" Kevin sounded on the verge of tears now. People are already talking. Everyone in the restaurant was staring at us. Some even took out their phones. This is going to be all over social media. Social media. Of course, that was their biggest concern. Not the fact that they had hurt their mother. Not the recognition that they had crossed a line. They only cared about their public image, their reputation in those social circles where they loved to show off their lifestyle financed by me. The knocking stopped for a moment, but I could hear their voices arguing in furious whispers. They were probably deciding on their next strategy. I knew Jessica well enough to know she had a full arsenal of emotional manipulations, and Kevin had learned well from her over the years. "Eleanor." Jessica's tone changed completely. Now it sounded soft, almost sweet. "I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. Maybe what I said yesterday came out wrong, but you know I didn't mean it. I was just joking with my friends. You know how we women are when we're together. Sometimes we say things without thinking." It was fascinating to hear how she could change her personality in seconds. From the furious woman who had been shouting and kicking my door, she had now transformed into the understanding daughter-in-law who had only made a small communication error. "Mom," now it was Kevin who had adopted the soft tone. "I understand we hurt you." Jessica explained what happened yesterday, and you're right to be upset. But declining the cards doesn't solve anything. It just makes things worse for everyone. For everyone, not for me, of course. For them, for their comfort, for their lifestyle. My emotional well-being still didn't factor into the equation. "Please, Mom, we can fix this. We can change things." Kevin's voice cracked slightly. "But I need you to reactivate the cards today. I have bills due. The car insurance is up tomorrow. And Jessica has doctor's appointments this week. We can't be left without money all of a sudden. Without money. As if it were their money. as if I were responsible for their insurance, their medical appointments, their expenses as independent adults. In that moment, I understood with crystal clarity that they truly saw no difference between my money and their own. In their minds, my savings were a family resource, not the result of decades of work and sacrifice by a woman who had already paid her dues in life. Eleanor, please, think about what you're doing. Jessica had switched strategies again. Now her voice sounded concerned, almost motherly. What will people think if they find out you cut off your own son? What will they say at church? What will the family think? The church? The family? It was always the same with her. Using my reputation, my relationships, my image as an emotional lever, as if my worth as a person depended on what others thought. As if my dignity was less important than the opinion of people who probably didn't even know how they treated me in the privacy of our homes. Look, Mom, Kevin had adopted a more serious, more adult tone now. I understand you want us to change some things. We can talk about boundaries, about how to better manage the family finances. But this isn't the way. This is emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation. The words echoed in my head like a slap. I was being emotionally manipulative? After years of their subtle blackmail, of being made to feel guilty every time I hesitated to give them money, of them using my motherly love to empty my bank account. The projection was so obvious it was almost laughable. The knocking started again, but more spaced out now, less aggressive. They were realizing the brute force strategy wasn't working. I could hear them move away from the door, probably walking around the house to see if they could spot me through a window. "Eleanor!" Jessica shouted from what sounded like my side window. "We saw your shadow. We know you're in there. Stop hiding like a coward." Coward. There was the real Jessica again, the one who peeked out when the sweet manipulations failed. The woman who had called me that old woman the day before, who had turned my generosity into a punchline, who had trained my son to see me as a resource instead of a person. I got up from my chair and walked slowly towards the window where she had shouted. I pulled back the curtain just enough for her to see me, and our eyes met through the glass. Her expression immediately changed from fury to relief, and then to that fake smile I knew so well. "There you are," she exclaimed, as if she had just found a lost child. "Come on, open the door, and let's talk like a family." I looked her directly in the eye for a long moment, feeling a strange calm. Then, very slowly, I closed the curtain again. I heard her shriek of frustration, followed by more pounding on the window, but this time I didn't flinch. I went back to my patio and sat down again. The phone immediately started ringing, but I silenced it. For the first time in years, my house was truly my own. The shouting and banging continued for another hour, but they gradually lost intensity. From my back patio, I could hear fragments of their frustrated conversations, their desperate plans to make me change my mind. Jessica suggested calling a locksmith to force the door open, but Kevin reminded her that would be breaking and entering. Even in their desperation, they didn't want to risk real legal trouble. Finally, I heard the car doors slam shut and the engine driving away. But I knew this was far from over. I knew Jessica well enough to know she was already planning her next move, probably something more elaborate and emotional. I wasn't wrong. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone started ringing with unknown numbers. First, it was Jessica's mother, her voice polite but firm. "Eleanor, dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jessica told me what happened, and I'm sure we can resolve this like civilized adults." I hung up without responding. Then it was my sister Carol, who lives in another state and had obviously received a heavily edited version of the events. "Eleanor, Kevin called me, very worried. He says you're acting strangely and that you left them high and dry at a restaurant. Are you okay? Are you feeling sick?" "I'm perfectly fine, Carol," I responded. "Better than ever, in fact. But I don't understand. Kevin says you canceled all their cards without any warning. That doesn't sound like the Eleanor I know. You've always been so generous with your family." "Maybe that was the problem," I said. "Maybe I was too generous for too long. But, Eleanor, they're your family. Jessica says you're punishing them for an innocent joke. Surely you can sit down and talk this out." An innocent joke. It was impressive how Jessica had managed to rewrite history in just a few hours. From a cruel humiliation in front of guests, It had now become an innocent joke that I had misinterpreted because I was too sensitive. "Carol, have you ever felt like an ATM for your children?" I asked directly. "What?" "No, why do you ask?" "Because that's exactly what I am to Kevin and Jessica. And yesterday, I finally realized it. Eleanor, you're exaggerating. Parents always help their children. It's normal. Is it normal to pay your adult son's rent for years? Is it normal to finance their vacations while you stay home alone? Is it normal for them to make fun of you for being generous?" Carol was quiet for a moment. "Well, maybe they've taken advantage of your generosity a little, but cutting everything off at once seems very drastic." "You know what's drastic, Carol? Working until you're 65 to ensure a decent inheritance for your son, only to find out he's already spending it while you're still alive." After that conversation, I decided to unplug the landline. I put my cell phone on airplane mode. I needed silence to process everything I was feeling, to plan my next steps. That night, as I prepared my dinner alone for the first time in months without the anxiety of waiting for calls, asking for money, I realized something important. I didn't feel guilty. My whole life, I had been trained to feel guilty when I didn't meet the needs of others, especially my family. But this time, that familiar guilt wasn't there. In its place, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Mental clarity, as if I had been living in an emotional fog and could finally see clearly. Every decision I had made in the last 10 years played out in my mind like a movie, and I could see patterns I hadn't wanted to acknowledge before. The cycle was always the same. Kevin or Jessica would approach me with a temporary financial problem. I would initially resist. They would apply emotional pressure. "It's just this one time. We're desperate. What will people think?" I would give in. They would solve their immediate problem, and a few weeks later, a new temporary problem would appear. There was never a real repayment plan. There was never a genuine acknowledgement of my sacrifice. And there was definitely never an invitation to participate in the benefits of my own generosity. I paid for their vacations, but I wasn't invited. I financed their dinners at fancy restaurants, but I ate alone at home. I covered their medical expenses, but no one asked about my health. I got up and walked to my study, where I kept all my financial documents. It was time to run the actual numbers, to understand exactly how much I had spent on them over the years. I pulled out my bank statements from the last 5 years and started calculating. The figure was devastating. $86,000. $86,000 in 5 years. And that didn't even count the years before, when I wasn't keeping such detailed records. It was more than half of my entire retirement savings, more than what many people earn in 2 years of work. But the most painful part wasn't the amount of money. It was realizing that in exchange for those $86,000, I had received mockery, indifference, and the treatment of being seen as an obligation rather than a blessing. As I went through the numbers, I found something that made me tremble with rage. They had been using one of my cards for premium streaming services, expensive gym memberships, and subscriptions to magazines I didn't even know existed. Small monthly charges that added up to hundreds of dollars a year, money automatically coming out of my account to pay for luxuries I never enjoyed. That night, I made another important decision. I took my will out of the file cabinet and read it carefully. I had drafted that document 5 years ago, when I still believed I was securing the future for a loving and grateful family. Kevin was the sole beneficiary of the house, the savings accounts, the investments, everything, but now I saw that will with different eyes. Why should I leave my entire estate to someone who had already spent more than half of it while I was still alive? Why reward with an inheritance the person who had treated me like a resource instead of a mother? I decided that the next day I would call my lawyer to schedule an appointment. It was time to make some major changes to my estate plans. If Kevin wanted to treat me like a bank, then he would have to settle for the interest, not the principal. I went to bed that night with a strange but liberating feeling. For the first time in years, I had made decisions thinking solely of my own well-being. For the first time in years, I hadn't stayed awake worrying about the financial problems of other adults. I slept better than I had in months. The next day, I woke up with an energy I hadn't felt in years. It was Friday, and for the first time in a long time, I had plans that didn't involve solving anyone else's problems. First, I would call my lawyer. Then I would go to the bank to make some additional changes. And maybe, just maybe, I would buy something nice for myself with the money I normally would have spent on someone else's whims. I plugged the landline back in while I made breakfast. As expected, I had 14 messages on the answering machine. I listened to them while I drank my coffee, and each one confirmed that I had made the right decision. Message 1. Jessica, her voice tearful. Eleanor, it's Jessica. I know you're upset, but please, think about what you're doing. Kevin didn't sleep at all last night. He's so worried about you. He says he's never seen you like this. Please, call us. Message 2. Kevin, sounding desperate. Mom, I need to talk to you. I went to the bank this morning and they told me you closed the account where you deposited our emergency money. Why would you do that? That account was for both of us. It was fascinating how he kept referring to my money as ours. That account had never been for both of us. It was my money that I deposited for their supposed emergencies, which invariably turned out to be vacations, expensive clothes, or restaurants. Message 3. Carol again. Eleanor, Kevin called me again. He says you also closed a savings account. Are you sure about what you're doing? Don't you think you're being a little radical? The following messages followed the same pattern. Feigned concern, questioning my mental state, and pleas disguised as sisterly advice. But message number 11 caught my attention. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mrs. Eleanor, this is Mark, my cousin Jessica's husband. Look, I know we don't know each other well, but Jessica asked me to call you. She's very worried, because she says you're acting very strangely. As a man, I think sometimes women complicate things more than necessary. Why don't you just forgive and forget? Family is the most important thing. Family is the most important thing. What a convenient philosophy when it comes to maintaining a status quo that benefits them. I wondered if Mark would be so willing to forgive and forget if someone made fun of him in front of his family while emptying his bank account. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called the law firm where I had my will prepared. The secretary told me that Mr. Wallace had a cancellation and could see me that afternoon at 2. Perfect. Then I called the bank and requested an appointment with the manager to review all my accounts and make some additional security changes. I also wanted to make sure that Kevin had no access to any information about my finances. As I was getting ready to leave, the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought it was Kevin and Jessica again, but when I looked out the window, I saw my neighbor Sharon standing on the porch. Sharon was a 62-year-old woman who had been widowed 2 years ago, and we occasionally chatted over the garden fence. I opened the door with some curiosity. Sharon had never come to visit me formally before. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I heard a lot of noise and shouting yesterday, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." I invited her in and served her coffee. It was refreshing to have someone in my house who wasn't there to ask for money or to manipulate me emotionally. "Is everything all right?" she asked with genuine concern. "Yesterday I saw your son and his wife were here for hours, shouting and banging on the door. I was about to call the police." I told her the whole story. Not the intimate details, but enough for her to understand the situation. Sharon listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding with expressions of understanding. "Eleanor," she said when I finished, "I have to confess something. For years I've watched how they treat you when they come to visit. I've seen them arrive in new cars, dressed in expensive clothes, talking on the latest smartphones. Meanwhile, you're still driving the same 10-year-old car and shopping at discount stores." Her words hit me because they were the external confirmation of something I had been denying internally. Others could see the obvious that I had refused to acknowledge. "But what has struck me the most," Sharon continued, "is that I've never seen them do anything for you. I've never seen them help you with groceries, fix something in your house, or just visit you unless it was to ask for something." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, feeling a mixture of shame and relief. "To someone looking from the outside, yes, but I understand why you couldn't see it. When you're a mother, you always want to believe the best of your children." Sharon stayed for another hour, and our conversation was the most honest and liberating one I had had in months. She told me about her own experiences with adult children who expected her to solve all their problems, and how she had learned to set boundaries after being widowed. You know what helped me the most? She said before she left. Realizing that being a good mother doesn't mean being a martyr. You can love your children without sacrificing your dignity for them. Her words resonated in my mind all the way to the bank. At the manager's office, we reviewed all my accounts and implemented new security measures. I changed all the passwords. I added two-step verification, and I made sure that only I had access to any financial information. Mrs. Eleanor, the manager said as he processed the changes. May I ask why these drastic changes? Do you have any specific security concerns? Let's just say I finally realized that my biggest financial security risk lives in my own family, I replied. The manager nodded with understanding. It's more common than you think, ma'am. We see many cases of older adults being taken advantage of financially by relatives. You did the right thing by protecting yourself. After the bank, I went to lunch alone at a small, cozy restaurant I had always wanted to try, but had never allowed myself the luxury. I ordered the most expensive dish on the menu, a glass of wine, and dessert. The total bill was $45, less than what Kevin and Jessica spent on a single round of drinks on their nights out. As I savored my lunch, I realized something important. It had been years since I had enjoyed a meal without the constant anxiety of calculating how much it was costing me, how much I might need to set aside for Kevin's next emergency, or whether I could afford this small personal pleasure. For the first time in years, I was eating with genuine appetite and pleasure. The appointment with Mr. Wallace, the lawyer, was revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. When I explained the situation and my desire to change my will, he showed no surprise. In fact, he told me that cases like mine were more frequent than I imagined. Mrs. Eleanor, he said as he reviewed my current will, I see we drafted this document 5 years ago. At that time, you designated your entire estate to your son, Kevin. Are you sure you want to make significant changes? Completely sure, I replied. Over these 5 years, I've seen my son's true character. He has shown that he doesn't value my generosity, and frankly, he has already spent more than half of his inheritance while I'm still alive. The lawyer took notes as I detailed the $86,000 I had documented, not counting the previous years. His eyebrows rose slightly when I mentioned the figure. I understand your position, he said. What kind of changes are you considering? I want to divide my estate. One part to charitable organizations that actually help people in need, not whimsical adults. Another part for my sister Carol, who has always been independent and has never asked me for anything. And for Kevin, I paused. For Kevin, just enough to show that I haven't disinherited him out of malice, but not enough for him to continue living without working. Are you thinking of a specific percentage? 50% to charity, 30% to my sister, and 20% to Kevin, on the condition that he can only receive his share if he demonstrates a full year of total financial independence. The lawyer smiled slightly. That last condition is interesting and completely legal. You're essentially incentivizing personal responsibility. I left the law firm feeling a deep satisfaction. For the first time in years, I had made decisions about my future that reflected my real values, not my fears or my maternal guilt. When I got home, there was an unfamiliar car in my driveway. An older, elegantly dressed woman was standing on my porch. It was Jessica's mother, Brenda. Eleanor, she said with a forced smile when she saw me arrive. I'm glad you're here. We need to have a woman-to-woman talk. I invited her in, more out of curiosity than politeness. I wanted to hear what version of the events this woman had received. Look, dear, Brenda began once we were seated. I know there was a misunderstanding yesterday between you and the kids. Jessica told me everything, and honestly, I think you're blowing the situation out of proportion. Blowing it out of proportion? I asked. Well, yes. Jessica says she made a comment that you misinterpreted, and now you've taken very drastic measures. Canceling your own son's credit cards? That seems like a very extreme reaction for a simple joke between women. A simple joke between women. It was impressive how the narrative had evolved. Now, not only had it been an innocent joke, but it was also my fault for not having a sense of humor. Brenda, I said calmly, do you give your daughter unlimited credit cards? Well, no, but do you pay your adult daughter's rent? No, but that's different. Do you finance your daughter's vacations while you stay home alone? Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Eleanor, every family manages their finances differently. Exactly. And I've decided to manage mine differently from now on. But think about Jessica and Kevin. They're young, they're building their future. They need support. They are 35 and 32, respectively. At that age, I had already raised a child, worked for years, and saved for my old age. Without any help from my parents. Times were different then. Times are different. That's true. Now there are more opportunities, better education, more access to bank loans. There's no reason why two educated adults can't support themselves. Brenda changed her strategy. Eleanor, Jessica is very upset. She cried all night yesterday. She says she has always seen you as a second mother and doesn't understand why you're suddenly rejecting her. A second mother who is only good for paying bills, according to her own words. That was a joke. Women always complain about their mothers-in-law. It's normal. Complaining in private is one thing, Brenda. Humiliating someone in front of guests is something else entirely. The conversation continued for another half hour, with Brenda using every manipulation tactic in the book. Guilt. Think about how your son feels. Fear. You're going to end up alone. Shame. What will people think? And even veiled threats. Jessica has contacts at Adult Protective Services. Finally, when she realized that none of her tactics were working, she switched to a more direct approach. Eleanor, I'm going to be frank with you. Jessica and Kevin are considering seeking legal help. There are ways to have a person declared mentally incompetent if they show erratic behavior with their finances. There it was. The real threat behind all the emotional manipulation. If I didn't give in voluntarily, they would try to take away my control over my own finances by force. Brenda, I said, standing up, I suggest you consult with a good lawyer before you try that. I just came from an appointment with mine, and he assured me that a person protecting their finances from family abuse is demonstrating mental competence, not the opposite. Her expression changed immediately. She realized she had shown her hand too soon. I didn't mean... She began to backtrack. Yes, you meant exactly that, I interrupted. And now that I know what your true intentions are, I believe this conversation is over. I walked her to the door in silence. Before she left, she said, Eleanor, I hope you reconsider. A family war benefits no one. There is no war, Brenda. There is only a woman who has finally learned to value herself. After she left, I sat in my living room and reflected on what I had just heard. Not only were they planning to intensify the emotional manipulation, but they were also considering legal measures to regain control over my money. That night I called Mr. Wallace and told him about Brenda's threat. He reassured me, explaining that to declare someone mentally incompetent requires solid medical evidence and an extensive legal process. Acting responsibly with one's personal finances does not qualify as evidence of incompetence. However, he warned me, I recommend you document everything, record conversations if possible, keep records of their threats, and consider getting a preventative psychological evaluation to have evidence of your mental competence. That night, for the first time since this all began, I felt a little bit of fear. But it wasn't fear of doing something wrong. It was fear of how far they would be willing to go to regain control over my money. But I also felt something stronger than fear, determination. Brenda's threat kept me awake that night, but not from fear, from a cold rage that grew with every passing hour. How dare they even consider having me declared mentally incompetent for protecting my own money? It was the ultimate manipulation. If you can't get what you want through persuasion, try to strip the person of their legal right to decide for their own life. The next day, Saturday, I followed Mr. Wallace's advice. First, I went to a private clinic where I had a complete psychological evaluation. The doctor, a professional woman in her 50s, listened as I explained the situation. Mrs. Eleanor, she said after 2 hours of tests and interviews, let me be perfectly clear. You are demonstrating exceptional mental lucidity. Recognizing patterns of abuse, establishing healthy boundaries, and protecting your financial resources are signs of a completely competent mind. In fact, I would say you're acting more rationally now than when you were enabling the financial abuse. She gave me an official report documenting my full mental competence, dated and sealed. It was my insurance policy against any future legal challenges. When I got home, I found Sharon working in her garden. She came over to the fence that separated our properties with a worried expression. Eleanor, an older woman, came by yesterday asking about you. She wanted to know if you had been acting strangely lately. I told her you seemed happier and more relaxed than ever. I told her about Brenda's visit and her veiled threat. Sharon listened with growing indignation. "That's unbelievable," she exclaimed. "Trying to have you declared incompetent for not wanting to give away your money? It's the most absurd thing I've ever heard." "What bothers me most," I said, "is that they truly believe they're entitled to my money. They don't see it as my estate. They see it as their inheritance, paid in advance." "You know what you need?" Sharon said with a mischievous smile. "You need to get out and enjoy your freedom. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" She was right. I had spent so many years living according to the needs and demands of others that I had forgotten what it felt like to do something simply for personal pleasure. "There's a 5-day cruise that leaves next Wednesday," Sharon continued. "I was going to go with my sister, but she had to cancel for health reasons. Would you like to come with me?" The idea thrilled me immediately. When was the last time I had traveled for fun? When had I slept in a bed that wasn't my own, eaten at a restaurant without calculating the cost, or simply relaxed without the constant anxiety of Kevin's next financial crisis? "I'd love to," I replied without hesitation. That afternoon we booked the cruise. $500 per person for 5 days, all inclusive. It was a fraction of what I had spent on Kevin and Jessica's last vacation, but this time it would be for my own enjoyment. Sunday morning, as I was researching what to pack for the cruise, the doorbell rang. It was Kevin, alone this time. He looked terrible, deep dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, a desperate expression. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, "please, we need to talk." "No, Jessica, no shouting, just you and me." I let him in, but kept my emotional distance. I had learned to recognize when I was being manipulated. "Mom, I'm desperate," he began. "The car insurance is due on Monday, and I don't have the money to pay it. If I don't renew it, I can't legally drive. And without a car, I can't get to work." "How much is the insurance?" I asked. $250. "And how much did you earn last month?" $2,500. But what, Kevin? "But we have expenses. The rent, food, utilities. And what else do you spend it on?" He was quiet for a moment. "Mom, you don't understand. Life is expensive. Life is expensive when you have a lifestyle you can't afford," I replied. "Tell me something, son. How much did you spend on restaurants last month?" "I don't know. Maybe." "How much do you spend on streaming services, gym memberships, food delivery apps?" "That's different, Mom. Those are basic necessities." "Streaming services are basic necessities?" "In the modern world, yes. You can't live like a hermit." There it was, the fundamental problem. Kevin genuinely believed that luxuries were necessities, and that real necessities were someone else's responsibility. "Kevin," I said calmly, "you're 35 years old. You have a college education. You have a job. Why can't you pay a $250 car insurance bill? Because there's no money left over after everything else. Then cut back on everything else. Period. It's not that easy. You can't just cut expenses like that." "Why not?" he asked, visibly frustrated. "Because we have a life to maintain. A life you can't afford. But you've always been there to help us." And there was the naked truth. He wasn't asking for temporary help. He was claiming what he considered his right. In his mind, I was a permanent part of his financial structure, not a mother who occasionally provided support. "Kevin, I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. In these 10 years, have you ever made a real budget and tried to live on your salary alone?" He fell silent. "Have you ever considered moving to a cheaper apartment?" Silence. "Have you ever voluntarily cut back on expenses so you wouldn't have to ask me for money?" "Mom, those are unfair questions." "Unfair? It's unfair to ask a 35-year-old man if he's tried to live within his means? You don't understand the pressure we're under. Jessica has expectations. Her friends live a certain way. We can't look poor. And when did you ever consider that my expectations and my financial pressure mattered?" For the first time in the conversation, Kevin was completely silent. I could see in his eyes that he was processing something he had never considered before. "Mom," he said finally, his voice softer. "I never thought. I didn't know you felt pressured." "Really? You never noticed that I was eating beans and rice while you went to expensive restaurants? You never wondered why I never bought new clothes for myself, but always had money for your emergencies?" Tears began to roll down his cheeks. I thought you liked helping us. I thought it was your way of showing love." "And it was, Kevin. But you turned my love into an obligation. You turned my generosity into an expectation. And finally, you turned my sacrifice into a punchline." "Mom, what Jessica said was the straw that broke the camel's back, but the glass had been filling up for years." Kevin cried silently for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different, more mature. "What can I do to fix this?" "You can start by paying for your own car insurance." Kevin sat in my living room for almost an hour after our conversation. We didn't talk much more, but I could see that something had changed in his expression. For the first time in years, he seemed to be genuinely reflecting on his behavior instead of just looking for ways to get what he wanted. When he finally left, he said, "Mom, I'm going to find a way to pay for the insurance, and we're going to have a serious talk about our spending." I didn't completely believe him, but at least it sounded like a first step toward maturity. On Monday morning, while I was packing for my cruise on Wednesday, I received an unexpected call. It was Jessica, but her tone was completely different from the one she had used in the preceding days. "Eleanor," she said in a calm voice, "I know things have been tense between us. Could we meet for a coffee? Without Kevin, without drama, just the two of us." I agreed, more out of curiosity than any hope of reconciliation. We met at a small coffee shop near the mall. Jessica arrived dressed more simply than usual, without the expensive jewelry and designer clothes she normally wore. She looked tired, but also more humble. "Eleanor," she began after we ordered our coffees, "I want to sincerely apologize for what I said last week. It was cruel, disrespectful, and completely inappropriate." "What made you change your mind?" I asked directly. "Honestly, the humiliation at the restaurant. But not just that. These past few days, I've had to face the reality of our finances without your support, and I realized something terrifying." "What was that?" "That we have no idea how to live within our means. We've been living like we were rich for years, because you were financing the difference between our income and our expenses." It was the first time I had ever heard Jessica offer an honest reflection on her financial situation. "Yesterday," she continued, "Kevin and I sat down and made a real budget, just with our salaries, without outside help. Do you know what we discovered? Tell me, that we spend almost double what we earn." "Double, Eleanor. Not just a little more, but double. And you were always covering the difference. And what are you going to do now?" "We're going to have to make drastic changes. The apartment where we live costs $1,200 a month. With our combined salaries, we should be paying $800 at most. We're going to have to move." "And Kevin is okay with that?" "He resisted at first, but when he saw the numbers on paper, he had no choice. We're also going to have to cancel memberships, services, and completely change how we socialize." Jessica paused to take a sip of her coffee. "Eleanor, I want to ask you something, and please be honest with me. When did you start to resent our financial dependence?" The question surprised me with its directness. I think the resentment grew gradually, but it crystallized when I realized that you didn't just expect my help. You took it for granted. "When was that?" "When you stopped asking for money and just started using it. When the authorized user cards became normal. When my savings became your automatic emergency fund." Jessica nodded with an ashamed expression. "You're right. At some point, we stopped seeing you as a person who was helping us and started seeing you as a resource." "Exactly. Is there any way we can rebuild our relationship?" she asked. "Jessica, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The relationship we had before no longer exists. That relationship was based on an unsustainable dynamic where I gave and you took. If we want to build something new, it has to be on completely different foundations." "What kind of foundations?" "Mutual respect, financial independence on your part, and a relationship where my value isn't determined by my economic utility." Jessica was silent for a long moment. Does that mean you'll never help us again? It means that if you ever need real help, in a genuine emergency, after you've proven you can live responsibly on your own, we could consider it. But it would be help, not a permanent subsidy. How long would we have to prove our independence? It's not a test with a deadline, Jessica. It's a life change. If you can maintain a balanced budget, live within your means, and build your own emergency savings, then you will have demonstrated real financial maturity. And our vacations? Our dinners at expensive restaurants? Those are things you'll have to earn with your own work, like most people do. Jessica looked genuinely overwhelmed. Eleanor, I'm not sure we even know how to live like that. Then it's time you learn. You have educations, jobs, and abilities. The only thing you've been missing is the motivation to be independent. And if we fail, then you'll fail as responsible adults, learning from your mistakes. But at least you'll fail as masters of your own decisions, not depending on someone else to solve your problems. We finished our coffees in a thoughtful silence. As we got up to leave, Jessica said to me, Eleanor, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I want you to know that I've learned something important this week. What's that? That being an adult isn't just about being a certain age. It's about taking on adult responsibility. And we've been playing house while you carried the real responsibilities. It was the most mature reflection I had ever heard her make. That evening, as I finished packing for my cruise, I felt strangely at peace. I hadn't lost a family. I had left behind a toxic dynamic that was hurting all of us. If Kevin and Jessica truly wanted to change, they would have to prove it with actions, not just words. On Tuesday, I received a text message from Kevin. Mom, I got a personal loan to pay for the car insurance. I also found a cheaper apartment. We're moving next month. Just wanted you to know. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small step toward the independence they so desperately needed. That night I slept soundly, knowing that the next day I would begin my first truly personal adventure in decades. The cruise was a revelation. 5 days of waking up when I wanted, eating whatever I craved, and doing activities just because they gave me pleasure. Sharon turned out to be a perfect travel companion, independent, funny, and completely free of family drama. On the ship, I met other women my age who had gone through similar experiences. During one dinner, a woman named Eileen told me how her 3 adult children had drained her retirement fund before she finally said enough. Another woman, Isabel, had discovered her son was using her credit card to gamble online. What surprised me the most, Isabel told me as we watched the sunset from the deck, was realizing I wasn't the only one. I thought it was a problem unique to my family, but it turns out there's a whole generation of parents who don't know how to say no to our adult children. When I returned home on Sunday, I felt renewed. 5 days without a single call asking for money, without financial anxiety, without the constant burden of solving other people's problems. It was like remembering who I was before I became the family bank. There were several messages on my answering machine, but to my surprise, none was a desperate demand for money. Kevin had called twice just to see if I had gotten home safely from the trip. Jessica had left a short message. Hope you enjoyed your cruise. We'd love to hear about your experience when you have time. On Monday morning, Sharon came over with coffee and pastries to hear all the details of the trip. As we were chatting on my patio, I saw Kevin's car park in my driveway. But this time, instead of getting out immediately and heading for my door, he sat in the car for several minutes. When he finally rang the doorbell, his expression was different. He seemed nervous, but also more mature somehow. Mom, he said when I opened the door. I know you just got back from your trip, but could we talk for a moment? I invited him in. Sharon excused herself discreetly and went back to her house. Mom, I wanted to tell you what we've been doing this week, Kevin began. Jessica and I moved into a smaller apartment. We're paying $600 less in rent a month. How do you feel about the change? Honestly, it was hard at first. The apartment is smaller, it's in a less fancy neighborhood. But after a few days, I realized something important. What's that? That I can sleep soundly knowing we're paying for everything with our own money. I don't have that constant anxiety of not knowing how we're going to cover next month's bills. It was the first time I had heard Kevin talk about financial anxiety from his perspective. It had never occurred to me that he might have also been stressed by the unsustainability of his lifestyle. We also canceled the expensive gym memberships and joined a basic one that costs a fifth of the price, he continued. And Jessica found a part-time job on weekends to bring in extra income. Jessica is working more? Yes, and it was her idea. She says she wants to contribute more actively to our finances instead of just managing money that comes from other places. I was surprised to hear that Jessica had taken that initiative. Mom, I also wanted to formally apologize. Not just for what happened 2 weeks ago, but for all these years. I never realized I was treating you like an ATM instead of my mother. What made you realize it? When we had to make our first real budget, I realized I had no idea how much it actually cost to live. My entire adult life, I had been living above my means because you were covering the difference. Kevin paused and looked me directly in the eyes. Mom, I want you to know that these past few days have been the first in years where I feel like a real adult making my own decisions, solving my own problems, being responsible for my own consequences. And how does that feel? Terrifying, but also liberating. I didn't know how much weight I was carrying until I got rid of it. Weight. The weight of knowing, deep down, that he wasn't truly independent. The weight of knowing he was living a financial lie. The weight of knowing his lifestyle depended on exploiting his mother's generosity. Those words hit me deeply. For years I had thought I was the only one suffering in that dynamic. But it turned out that Kevin had been carrying guilt and anxiety as well. Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that's happened, but there's something I'd like to ask you. Tell me, do you think one day we could have a normal relationship? A relationship where I'm your son who visits because he loves you, not because he needs something. The question moved me because it implied that he understood the difference. Kevin, that relationship can start today if you want it to. I've always wanted a son who visits because he cares about me, not because I'm useful. Then, would you like it if Jessica and I came for lunch on Sunday? We'll bring the food, we'll cook, and we'll just spend time together. I would love that. After Kevin left, I sat in my living room reflecting on everything that had changed in 2 weeks. I had lost my role as my family's financial rescuer, but I had gained something more valuable: my self-respect and the possibility of a genuine relationship with my son. That evening, I called Mr. Wallace to ask about modifying my will again. After the conversation with Kevin, I wanted to consider a different approach. Instead of punishing him permanently, I decided to create a will that rewarded demonstrated maturity over time. Mrs. Eleanor, the lawyer said, you're thinking of a tiered will based on behavior. Exactly. If Kevin demonstrates real financial independence for 2 consecutive years, he could receive a larger portion. If he continues that pattern for 5 years, another portion. But if he falls back into his old habits, we revert to the original plan. It's a smart structure. It incentivizes long-term personal growth. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in years, I was planning my future based on hope instead of fear. Hope that my son had truly learned and grown. Hope that our relationship could heal. Hope that my final years would be lived with dignity and respect. I went out to my patio and looked at the stars. In the distance, I heard the sound of the fountain I had installed in my garden last year. A small luxury I had only allowed myself after years of doubting whether I deserved to spend that money on myself. Now I knew the answer. I had always deserved to treat myself with the same generosity I had shown to others. It had taken 68 years to learn that lesson, but I had finally learned it. And I would never forget it again.